Okay, I'm just going to explain just very quickly. This is a webinar, it's not a meeting, and so attendees will see the committee, but we won't necessarily be able to see you, so your screen will not be on. So you will see the committee of CAGNE, and when the speakers come, you'll be able to see the speakers and they will share their slide presentations to you. So sit back, enjoy the AGM, and you can use obviously the chat room to communicate with us, and our wonderful Jenny is operating the webinar this evening for us, and she will be responding to you. So we're now going to start the meeting, and Jenny, if I can leave it to you that you enter everybody or set them up as panelists as they come in, if that's okay with you.
Yes, I'll set up the speakers as panelists. Yep.
Thank you. Okay. So welcome, I'm Sally Pavey. I am chair of CAGNE, Communities Against Gatwick Noise Emissions, and I thank you all for attending our virtual AGM in these worrying times of COVID. But it was necessary to have an AGM as we need to talk to our members and talk to residents and give you a quick update. Some quick rules for this evening's events. You'll all be muted. We did ask for questions before the event, and we have had some questions, some really good ones, so thank you for those, and they will be asked of the speakers, and CAGNE will answer questions in our AGM, which follows the speakers this evening. If you have any other questions as a result of this evening, can you please email us afterwards? By all means, put them in the chat room and we will try to include them. But with two keynote speakers tonight, we've got quite a lot to get through, and I don't really want to keep you sitting looking at us all the whole evening. We're not as probably as jolly as Coronation Street or some of the other soaps on TV at the moment. So again, you'll all be muted and you will see our lovely faces, I'm afraid. You'll be asked to vote during the evening when we come to the appropriate parts of the AGM. This will appear on your screen as a poll, and you will have to answer yes or no, and the results will be announced on your screen to how the poll goes. This is to vote for the committee, the chair, the president, etc. during our AGM. CAGNE's had a very, very busy year, and for CAGNE, the workload has grown. So during these worrying times, of aviation has continued to present us with lots of consultations and lots to be keeping us very busy on your behalf. I'd like to personally thank my committee for their support during 2020. Personally, it was a very sad year for me, and professionally, it was a very, very hard year as well. And I'd also like to thank everybody that supported CAGNE during 2020 and continuing to 2021. As a member of Parliament once said to the CAGNE committee, if they are attacking you, then you must be doing a good job, keep at it. And I think we have experienced more than our fair due this year, but we're still here, and we're representing you more than ever before. I hand over to our wonderful president, St. Nicholas White, who will introduce our guest speakers tonight, who I hope are there in the darkness somewhere out there. So
I can't see them yet.
They're not there yet?
No.
Oh, do you think they're having problems?
I don't know.
Okay. Can we just check the email account to make sure that they're not emailing us? Ah, they're trying to get in. They're saying on chat room.
Sally, message from Rob Light saying he's got a message saying the account's blocked.
Jenny?
A message where?
Presumably on his computer screen. He just says, I went back to him and said, try now after 7, but I've had a message to the effect that it says account blocked. That's all he said.
Is that his Zoom account?
No idea.
Okay, so Henry Smith is there, but we can't see him at the moment. So I think, Jenny, have you got Henry Smith as an attendee?
Can't see him in there, no.
Henry's definitely there because he said, I can see you, but can you see me?
Yeah.
So he's clearly in the attendees list somewhere.
Yeah, his name was the other way around.
Oh, okay, lovely. So, right, so Nicholas, over to you. Sorry about that.
Well, good evening, everyone, to this CAGNE AGM. I'm delighted to be able to welcome two lots of speakers. One, and the first one, is Mr. Henry Smith, who is the MP for Crawley, and who has a major problem because Crawley, unfortunately, has been heavily hit by the COVID events and all the problems that have gone on at Gatwick. And he's also very much involved in the air industry. So can I please hand over to Henry, and Lisa will read out the questions to you after you've spoken.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be with you this evening. Hopefully you are hearing me. A nod of the head would be very reassuring. Good, okay. Delighted to be here, and it's very good to see everybody. So Nicholas, you're absolutely right that had we been meeting this time last year, we might have had an indication that there were difficult times ahead, but I don't think anybody would have imagined or predicted just where we would be 12 months later. The very nature of the aviation industry and the coronavirus is that, of course, it was one of the very first to suffer, as first confidence in traveling plummeted, and then various national restrictions around the world came into place. And will probably be one of the slowest to recover as confidence slowly comes back, and of course the impact on the economy, on the ability of people to travel will happen. And so that leaves me in quite a difficult situation. I've always been acutely aware, having been Member of Parliament for Crawley, which of course is the home of Gatwick Airport, since 2010, and before then, both as a local resident and as a West Sussex County Councillor from 1997 until 2010, I've been acutely aware that having Gatwick in our area is a distinct mixed blessing. It is a major driver of the local economy and employment, both directly and indirectly, because many firms, companies and organizations choose to locate in the area, but nevertheless, it has a significant environmental impact on our area, not just through noise, which I think we're principally concerned about speaking about this evening, but also carbon emissions and ground operations as well, congestion on our roads such as the M23, the London to Brighton rail line, and the issue of people being overflown as well, which I'm sure is something we will come on to with the focus that is shifting onto airspace modernization. So my job has always really been one of trying to strike a very difficult balance. I'm sure sometimes in the eyes of people who are very pro aviation and very skeptical about the impact it has on the environment, I perhaps haven't always got that balance right, but I think it is my duty to speak up for the economy and the realities of that and the importance of the employment it brings, but at the same time make sure that the very beautiful part of the country in which we live, we're still very lucky to have quite a green, open and pleasant environment, despite the fact that we are in such close proximity to one of the world's greatest cities, is a balance that I've always sought to represent, whether in Parliament or locally. In Parliament, the line I've always taken, and indeed in terms of local policy, is that I'm opposed to Gatwick Airport expanding its footprint. So I've always been opposed to the idea of a full-blown second runway and the boundary of the airport being extended. I think that is unnecessary. I also think that isn't the answer to our commercial and connectivity demands as a country as well. But at the same time, of course, we have to recognize that if Gatwick doesn't exist, then our local economies, not, as I say, not just directly aviation and that sector, but more widely suffers. And I think we have seen that, unfortunately, writ large over the last 10 or 11 months, and we will, I think, continue to do so. So the question for me is, where do we go from here? Aviation, of course, will come back, but I think it's important that when it does come back, it comes back in a much more environmentally sustainable way and in a way that grows economically. I also think it's very important that our local economy is more diverse, isn't so dependent on one particular sector. I think history has been littered with examples, sadly, of coal mining towns and shipbuilding towns that have suffered when those industries have gone through difficult times. I don't think aviation is quite in that category. I think what we have seen with this pandemic is quite unique in terms of its impact on that. But nevertheless, I think it is a truism and something that's important, that economies should be as diverse as possible and therefore not overly reliant on the fortunes of one or two particular industries. I mentioned earlier on that the government, of course, and indeed in the House of Commons just on Tuesday, there was legislation that was going through in terms of airspace modernisation. I do think that is a real opportunity. The airspace above London and the southeast of England is probably the busiest anywhere in the world and hasn't really been looked at or modernised in, well, at least half a century in any real form. So there's real opportunity in terms of airspace modernisation to ensure that aviation has less of an impact on the environment. So routing aircraft so they're not always going over the same point in terms of noise, but also making sure that aircraft get on the ground when they arrive at Gatwick or other London airports as quickly as possible. One of the big impacts, I think, in terms of noise and indeed carbon emissions are aircraft when they have to circle, when they have to stack. So if through using satellites and GPS, aircraft can be much more efficiently flown in, then I think that is a benefit not only in terms of scheduling and efficiency of the airspace, but also an environmental positive as well. But nevertheless, I know the changes are controversial because it's not so much the modernisation, it's making sure that those air routes, when they are upgraded in several years' time, are used in a way that takes full account of the communities that are overflown. I also think technology is a big part of the answer. Ironically, exactly a year ago, in February 2020, UK airlines committed to net zero carbon by 2050. But we don't have the technology yet to fully deliver that. There's a lot of talk about biofuels, and there's been some success in their implementation, but the technology is still, I would say, in its infancy. A lot of talk about electric propulsion of aircraft. But again, unless there is a significant advancement in technology, and it's not to say there isn't, that's probably only viable for shorter term flights with smaller numbers of passengers on board. So there's a lot of ambition. I think, as in many parts of the new economy, the UK can be a leader in a green industrial revolution. And I say that not just in terms of fine words. I think that is a genuine commitment that we need to see through as a country. Later on this year, it was of course supposed to be last year, but later on this year, we're hosting the COP26 conference on climate change. It's good news that the new United States administration has rejoined or are rejoining the Paris Accords. I think we can make a lot further progress on that. The ultimate goal, you know, I appreciate that this is much more difficult to achieve than to speak about, is that we can have economic growth with aviation as part of that, but at the same time do so in a way that isn't contributing negatively to climate change. I think in the past as a country, we've been very innovative in finding solutions to problems when they present themselves, often at the 11th hour, I think, but nevertheless, I think we do that. And so I'm more optimistic about the future. And I believe that we can, as neighbours of Gatwick, both benefit from its economic input, but at the same time, not have our lives made intolerable as we go forward. So I think I've probably spoke. I'm not quite sure how much time I was allocated, Sally, but I've probably spoken enough at length, and it's probably best if I address further points or parts that you feel I might have omitted in answer to any questions.
Henriette, thank you very much for that. That was very interesting. And Lisa will read out some of the questions to you.
Hi, Henry. I think you really, your comment about mixed blessings and Gatwick and your challenge of getting the right balance is the ethos of many of these questions. So I think we can certainly explore and expand on your comments some more. So the Chief Executive of Coast Capital at the recent Gatwick Diamond Virtual Seminar described the region's economic position as having been a bit too dependent on the airport. Many parts of the UK have suffered disproportionately due to their over-reliance on one industry or employer. Reflecting on the past 12 months downturn, are you tempted to reconsider your enthusiasm for Gatwick's second runway and its dramatic growth?
Well, thank you, Lisa, for those questions. I mean, I've never been in favour of a full second runway at Gatwick, and I remain open-minded about use of the standby runway for limited purposes. I'm not saying that I support it or not. I think, frankly, the current situation of the last 11 months means that although Gatwick, of course, are wanting to go full steam ahead with plans on that, I think the reality of that on the ground has slipped back quite a few years, as indeed has another runway, I think, at Heathrow Airport as well. So I've always been opposed to the footprint of Gatwick being extended, not a foot or an inch over the current perimeter fence. And I also think, in terms of some of the land around Gatwick, that we can ease some of the safeguarding of that in terms of being reserved for the airport. But I remain open-minded about Gatwick growing its business within its current boundaries, so long as that can be done in a way that is environmentally sustainable. The point about diversifying the economy is absolutely critical. The economy has been becoming more diverse over the last decade or so than perhaps it was, but it's got a lot further to go. And I think that part of the investment we're seeing from the government in the area is very much about that diversification. So we've seen a commitment of over £8 million being spent by the government, or to be spent by the government, in what they call an innovation centre based in Manor Royal. And the very point of that is to make sure that we are getting more diverse companies. And there are good examples of that. We've got some world leading medical technology companies, varying medical systems, electro-oncology. We've got increasing financial and consulting companies in the area, but of course we've got a lot of aviation related ones as well. So I think diversification is a big part of the key in terms of over reliance on one sector.
Okay, thank you. The next question we had submitted for you is, your enthusiasm for Gatwick Airport expansion is well known. I'd be interested to learn how you reconcile your voting in the House with the wishes of the constituents and neighbouring MPs whose areas are significantly impacted by aircraft noise.
Well, again, I'd slightly challenge that I'm in favour of a second runway. As I say, I'm not in favour, at the risk of sounding a bit trite, I'm not in favour of expansion of the footprint of Gatwick. Whether they can use the current configuration of Gatwick within their boundary more effectively and efficiently, as I say, I remain open-minded about that. But one of the things I come back to in my introductory remarks are there's a very difficult, I'm not looking for sympathy on this, but there's a very difficult balancing act that I need to strike between the undoubted economic benefits of Gatwick, but at the same time not being over-reliant, and the environmental impact that undoubtedly a major airport, the world's busiest single runway airport, has. So I have to try and balance that. I would also slightly challenge the premise of the question that everybody locally is against expansion. I find that there's probably about a 60-40 split of opinion in my constituency of Crawley, with about 40% in favour of expansion and about 60% against. So I don't think it's quite it's quite the sort of single view from constituents. I do appreciate, though, as you get into sort of Reigate and Tunbridge Wells, Haywards Heath, Horsham, and even further afield, Godalming and so forth, then perhaps those towns get more overflown, but they perhaps don't quite have the same economic advantage of Gatwick. Although that being said, Gatwick does have a very, very wide travel to work area from people who work directly there or in some of the employers in the area. So it is a very difficult balance to strike. As I said at the beginning, I'm sure on both ends of the spectrum, I'm judged as not striking that balance correctly. But one thing this pandemic has taught us is we're in a rapidly evolving situation, and being absolutely stuck on one vision for the future is probably not the wisest thing to do.
Thank you. Well, you're halfway through your difficult questions. Just so you've got a barometer of where we are. So, as you know, a couple of years ago, the government decided to accept the Commission's recommendation that Heathrow should be expanded, not Gatwick. The French majority owners of Gatwick have decided to ignore this decision and to apply for the building of a second runway. Is your intention to support the government's plan or to continue to support Gatwick?
Well, I support the government's plan, and that's not to say I don't support Gatwick. Again, recognising they are an important employer and economic contributor, but I don't believe that the answer to the need for aviation connectivity, the answer is a second runway at Gatwick, for not just for environmental reasons, but also because very few major cities around the world are successful, with probably the only example being New York, are successful with lots of airports serving them. Most major cities around the world work best on a hub model, and undoubtedly Heathrow is the major hub for London. and therefore I don't think it makes much economic sense, let alone environmental sense, for there to be a full-blown second runway at Gatwick Airport.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, how do you justify the climate emergency with your enthusiasm for flying, as aviation is one of the biggest polluters that our planet faces today?
Well, undoubtedly, aviation is a contributor to carbon emissions and climate change, but there are also many other factors. The ground operations as well, I think, is a major contributor as well, and in terms of localized air pollution as well, I think more of it comes from ground operations around the airports than actually from aviation itself. I mentioned earlier on that there's a commitment from UK airlines that they will be net zero carbon, as will, by law, the rest of the economy by 2050 and sooner if possible. And I think that is a genuine commitment, and the government have introduced the Jet Zero Council to really sort of invest and lead that effort. And I think, again, there's an opportunity for British industry to be at the forefront of that green industrial revolution, as we were 200 years at the forefront of the original industrial revolution. I think we do that innovation well as a country, and I think that's a big part of the answer. We also need, though, to convince the rest of the world to be much more sustainable. I mentioned earlier on, I'm very pleased with the new Biden administration recommitting the United States, which is obviously a major emitter of carbon to the Paris Accords. We also, though, have to convince nations like China, India, and others who represent major global emitters of carbon. Let's not forget, and this is not to sort of excuse responsibility for our part, but the UK accounts for about 1% of global carbon emissions. If we can reduce that and get that, as I say, by law, and we're the first major country in the world to enshrine that in law, to a net zero by 2050, then absolutely we need to do that for its own good, but also to lead by example as well. And again, I don't make no apologies for repeating the importance of COP26 in Glasgow later on this year in seeking to achieve that. So I think we can achieve economic growth at the same time as reducing our negative impact. But that's a difficult thing to achieve. What I would say, though, if I can just add a personal thing, is I've been vegetarian for over 35 years now. And one of the principal reasons I've been vegetarian is because meat production produces about 15% of all global emissions in the world, which is more than aviation. So if that's a sort of an excuse to offset when I fly, then well, I suppose I'll use that card. But the point for my raising that is that, yes, aviation is a part of global emissions, but there are also other areas where we need to clean up our act. And so I'm delighted, actually, in 2020, one of the more positive things to happen in 2020, we burnt, I say only, about 8 million tons of coal in energy production, which was the same amount that we burnt in 1769. So, we are making progress. We went for, I think it was over 60 days last summer without burning any coal, 60 days in a row without burning any coal to produce energy. So, we can do it when we put our minds to it. And as I said at the beginning, often it's at the 11th hour. But as long as we get there, that's the main thing. And aviation needs to play its part.
Henry, thank you very much for that. And now may I introduce, and I'm delighted that they've been able to come again this year, ICCAN, the Independent Commission on Civil Aviation Noise, and we're delighted to have Robert Light, who is the head commissioner of ICCAN, and Rupert Basham. So, Robert, over to you.
Thank you, Sir Nicholas, and good to see you, Henry. Nice to hear you speak earlier. Now, I think I've got a short number of slides. Here we go. Excellent. Which hopefully you can all see. Hopefully the technology will hold out. I was a little bit late getting in because it wouldn't have me for some reason, but hopefully it will stick with us now. Really pleased to be back with you again, 12 months since the last AGM. And at that time, we'd just been established 12 months. We just published our first public report, which was a review of the survey of noise attitudes. And we were setting out what was quite an ambitious plan for the next 12 months. Quite confident that we weren't going to face a world pandemic of anything. However, I think as we've realised, we've had a
You've gone mute.
Rob, can you hear me? Okay, we have a bit of a technical fault at the moment. I'm not quite sure what's happened. ICANN's just left us, is going to re-log in. I do apologise. Not quite sure why you can't hear Robert Light. We're just working on it, and hopefully we can have it fixed very shortly. May have been the problems that we were having at the outset of getting Robert Light into the meeting. Jenny, can we just unshare the ICANN presentation at the moment? Thank you. Okay. Whilst we just wait for Robert to rejoin us, Henry, you're still with us, I believe. Perhaps not. His name's on the screen. Oh, yes, he is.
Hello.
There.
Yes.
I'm really sorry to jump back at you.
No, not at all.
We seem to be having problems with Robert Light.
Yes, I know. I saw that. Hopefully he can log back on soon.
Yes. he's coming now, so that's really good. I just wanted to thank you very much for joining us this evening, for giving up your evening. We really do appreciate it. And, you know, it was very interesting to hear you talking about the Gatwick sort of story, as it were, via COVID, and how you see the future. And interesting that there's a bill going through Parliament on the modernisation of airspace, which potentially has good and bad things, and we'll just have to wait and see what comes from it. But we do really appreciate you attending this evening.
What I would say is that we have a relatively new aviation minister, somebody called Robert Courts, and actually I rate him very highly. I think he's got a broad command of the subjects, and he's not just there to, you know, promote the airlines and airports' interests. He's very much there. I think he has an understanding of the environmental impact of aviation as well. So I'm quite optimistic that you know, we have individuals in place with the new minister in particular who understands the broad demands faced, so not just the economic but the environmental as well. So I think that's a positive, and by all means, you know, he's actually very good at engaging. So by all means, you know, do contact him.
Thank you very much, because we've had sort of a couple of aviation ministers, and so hopefully he'll stay for a bit longer than the previous ones. But yes, and I think what we've Sir Stephen Hillier at the CA as well, who's also an environmental person. Hopefully the future is looking better. Thank you, Henry. Now, Rob, can you hear us, and can we hear you? This is the moment. I apologise again to the attendees, but should we try and share your screen again, Rupert? And let's hope we can hear you. You're muted at the moment. Let's ask you to unmute yourself and check we can hear you. Can we hear you?
I don't know. Oh,
yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Right.
Put another 50 pence in the meter.
Yeah. I really apologise. I don't know what's gone on, other than all I can say is I'm on my third computer, and I don't need any headphones for this one. So, so apologies for that technical problems. Did you hear anything?
No, we couldn't. Well, some people could hear you, but the committee couldn't hear you. But let's crack on whilst we can hear you, just in case there's another gremlin coming along.
Right. I'll try and recap very quickly and get back on track.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
It's 12 months since I was with you before. We were quite bushy-tailed and positive about the year ahead following our first 12 months as a new body. We just published our first report into Sonar, and we were ready for a positive year. Since our second year has obviously been challenged totally by COVID, but we have published another 7 reports throughout the year covering a range of issues affecting aviation noise, including our discussion document on the future of aviation noise management, which we published in October last year. And the challenge of the last 12 months has really, I think, made us to reevaluate what we do and how we do things. We've had all the organisational challenges of working remotely that everyone will be present with, but we've kept the core focus on the things that we want to achieve, and we set out with you last year. The extra thing is we did take the advantage of the summer, or the quieter skies in the summer to be precise, to do a survey with Ipsos Mori, because we thought it was really important to capture what people thought about aviation noise in the quieter skies summer and the COVID summer, not necessarily expecting us to go on as long as it has done, but we thought this would be a great moment in time. So we did that work throughout the summer and published that report in the autumn of this year. If we could just move the slides on. So if you look at what we have published this year in terms of our work, we've produced a review of noise metrics, which was our first report in July of this year. And this was really about actually getting under the complexity of metrics and trying to get a route map through that so that we get a consistency of information and published by airports, but also we start to get a situation where it's a people's language and not an expert's language that's used for noise measuring. We also produced our on-site line consultation kit for CAP 1616, the Airspace Modernization. We are very conscious that when you look at all the airports in the UK, there's a huge range of both experience and quality of their engagement. And so we see very much a key role for us will be to try and drive those standards up and get more consistency. So that was the first report of that, which we focus very much on what you do for the Airspace Modernization engagement. And in December, we picked up our best practice for engagement between airports and communities on noise, where this was a much broader report. The two of them together, I think, give a very comprehensive picture to airports about how they should be conducting engagement in the future. And we've had a number of I know I've read it, which is always a good start, but actually a number of airports have said this is really helpful because no one set out how the methods they should be using or could be using before. And that's from a range of airports across the country. So we welcome that, and that will be an ongoing dialogue with airports to try and improve the standard of what they do. And crucially, that they continue to do it whatever is going on. So we've been saying to airports throughout this period, keep talking to communities, keep communicating, because don't just turn up to communities when there's something going wrong. So the survey of people's lockdown experiences is what we published in October, and we also produced in September the Aviation Noise and Public Health Review, which was our first look at the quality and standard of evidence of health impacts on noise. I think it's the first time that's ever been put together in one review of it. What we were conscious of is there's various interpretations of what's been out there. We decided we've got to get some sense into this, because for too long decision makers both in government and in the industry have not had reliable health information that they can trust and make judgments on. And you can make your own interpretation as to how they played that. But the point is the quality of evidence wasn't there. This review has for us mapped out where the gaps are and where we need to do further work so that in the future we will be able to give a clear view. Go on forever with research in that area. We are very conscious of that. But I think what we need to be able to do for decision makers is not give them an absolute position, but give them a balance of probabilities so that decisions can be made in a more informed way. So that's the key aspects of the work we've been doing up to press. And I think all those issues have actually taken the aviation agenda forward. But I think the critical one for us now, if I can just move on a slide, will be the next step, which is our big report, which we aim to publish in the middle of March, which will be our future vision for the future of aviation noise management. And what we are doing, and we're working on that document at the moment, we conducted a consultation exercise on our emerging views. They were emerging views for a very good reason. One, we wanted to test some ideas with different sectors to see what came back. And two, we wanted to get some good information back. And I'm very pleased that we got both. Fantastic response from different sides of the aviation debate, despite COVID, and some really good and really helpful focus groups where we were able to get into the issues in a much more deeper way, which is really helpful to our thinking. So I'm obviously not going to be able to tell you what we're going to say in total, but I will go because we're finalising a lot of that, and that engagement was really helpful in doing so. But the key aims, I think, will will be similar, because that increasing that consistency and transparency is crucial in everything we do. I mean, we see such a thrown together system of regulation of aviation noise in this country, and that's not to blame anybody. It's just the way it happened. It evolved. It was too difficult to standardize in the past. Well, it can't be too difficult to standardize in the future, I think will be a key message for us, because it's got to a situation where it's not working. So our key aspect will be setting standards. How do we ensure that standards are set so we get that consistency across the industry? How do we ensure that the enforcers have got a clear platform to actually enforce against? Because we don't see that at the moment. We see so much variance between the different regulators, both in how they do it and what they are regulating against. And we also recognise that there is a case for local solutions and local regulation, but it's not a bit as big an issue as parties make it out to be, because there are some common issues that affect all airports and all communities. Some of those local solutions might be different, but they're not that different in their core ingredients. And I think that will be key to deal with that issue. We will see our second goal as being health, and the work we intend to do on health in the future. We know it's not going to be a quick fix, because it's a complex area, and research we will need to do will take some time. But our goal there is very much to ensure the situation is where public health actually becomes a key aspect in noise management, and having the right data and the right information to do that is crucial. And what the academic experts tell us is there's some really good stuff, but actually a lot of it is weak, and it isn't a clear and positive picture on the health impacts at the moment. So that's what we want to change. And the third area is future focus. I mean, the one thing that's not stopped has been technological advancement, and we are conscious that aviation has a poor record, in my view, of being ready for future advancement of technology, both in terms of systems, both in terms of technology that's actually on planes. Everybody has given us a different story, as you can imagine, but very clear message from both airlines, airports, and everybody and manufacturers, that even the technology we've got out there at the moment could be used in a better way to manage noise and keep noise emissions down. And I think that's something that we want to ensure that we change the approach, so we're ahead of the technology rather than chasing it, which is what I think we are now. So if I can move on to our next steps. So we're plowing through the feedback, which has been really helpful, as I said to you before, and we will publish around the middle of March our views on the show, set out what we deem to be our role within that, because I think actually what is going to be crucial is how do we make bring the recommendations in that document to life, and how do we make that happen? And we see ICCAN as having a major role in doing that. Whether we change our status over the period of what will be our corporate strategy over the next 3 years, which we'll publish at the same time, will be a view we're thinking about. But there is strong reason for us to, instead of being an advisory body, where our main power is persuasion, a statutory body means you've got to be listened to, and I think there is an attraction to that position, because we are conscious that we can come up with as many good ideas as we want, but actually everyone can say yes, that's very interesting, and get on with what they were doing before. And we feel that, not that we haven't got a lot of goodwill and got a lot of strong powers of persuasion, because I think we have, and I think we've moved things around and actually started to move the agenda forward over this last 2 years. But I think there will come a point where people say, I'm not sure we want to do that, and we don't have to, do we? Because they're only advisors. So I think that'll be a crucial fact for us to deal with. And I think we are very conscious that, you know, it's a different world to what it was 12 months ago. So we have to produce a plan for the future of aviation noise management that is deliverable. So we need to be very clear about the long-term goals we need to achieve, but we also need to make sure that getting to those goals has a clear route map, because the pace that we would have probably wanted to push 12 months ago clearly is going to be, we're not going to be able to push it at that pace at the present time. And when you look at the recent expectations that aviation could be not just 2, 3, or even 4 years before it actually recovers, I think that will be challenging. What we are keen to do, though, is ensure that there is a guidance there so that when aviation does recover, it recovers in a better way. And we don't just go back to repeating the same, creating the same problems and repeating the same mistakes that have been made in the past. And I think there's a willingness to do that from some sectors, but I have to say I am disappointed about how certain parts of aviation are treating the noise agenda. And I think that is a challenge for us all to look at for the future. But we are keen that noise is viewed and is considered in the same way that the carbon agenda is by aviation in the future. It has to do that. If it doesn't, then it's actually building up problems for the industry, never mind individual communities in the future. And I think if you look at the very powerful arguments about what's happened around some airports where yes, the carbon agenda has questioned whether the airport should be expanded and get permission to expand. I think it's the noise agenda that has tipped that big concern into a refusal of that planning permission. And I think that will be a powerful message which we're trying to get across both to industry but also to government, that actually you can't come back to noise when the planes are flying again. You need to be looking at noise management now when the planes aren't flying. So we have a very ambitious agenda for the forthcoming years. We know we can't go at the pace we want to because that's aviation, and we're impatient in that way, but we do understand we have to pace our proposals so that we can land them and make sure we drive real change. And even when we get the sort of good idea, but we can't do it now response, which I know we will do, we will not relent from actually putting forward what we think to be the best ideas for the future of the industry and communities. Thank you, Sally. That's a bit of a ramble of where we're going through, but hopefully that gives you an update on what we've done over the last 12 months.
Okay, so Nicholas, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Robert, thank you very much indeed for that. As always, a very good presentation. There are now some questions which are going to be read to you, if we may.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
Lisa.
Lisa?
I wasn't allowed to unmute myself, I had to wait. Okay, so the first question is, can you provide an update on the new survey of noise attitudes 14, and is there a new survey underway to replace this?
Yeah, sure. The update is in terms of the sonar report. We've been working, we published a report last year. We've worked with community members and with industry to try and iron out what are the problems of that survey. So we will be publishing our development study later this year. has been a little bit delayed from where we wanted it to be because of the lack of resources we've had to carry that through over the last few months. The aim of that will be so it is oven ready to go at the most appropriate time. And I say no oven ready for a reason, is I don't see a point in doing it in 2021, and we don't know whether it would be right to do it in 2022, irrespective of funding at this stage. So we will need to make a decision about when will be the best time for that to be done to get the best results, because the plan of that is to have a way of survey noise attitudes, which will give not just a snapshot, but actually a continuous comparable set of results, so that over a period you've got reliable information. And we never have a situation which we've had for many years where decision makers are using noise attitude surveys that were done 10, 15, sometimes dare I say 20 years ago. I'm treating that as what people think. So that definitely is our plan for that. The summer survey we do hope to repeat. Again, we don't want to repeat it. We don't know yet whether we'll repeat it this summer, because we don't know if there will be a comparable set of data, and we need to make a judgment later on in the year. But we certainly will repeat it to try and get again a useful piece of information that can be used, and I think will be there as a benchmark for the future.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, what is your definition of overflight, as mapping does not show houses overflown and yet they suffer from aircraft overhead?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, definition of overflying. I think one of the problems is there are too many vague definitions that can mean different things to different people. And I think one of our broader roles is going to try and simplify that situation. So if we use a word, then people know what that means, and it's not got different meanings to other people. I think overflight is something where to my way of thinking, you are overflown if a plane overflies you, and you can see the impact or hear the impact, should I say. That's how I would see it. So if you use my personal experience, most of the time I'm not overflown. But when Leeds Bradford are using easterlies, I am sort of close by, yes. And then we've had, like every day this week, we've had test flights going over, and they've been right over the top of my house. So I would say I'm overflown in that experience, and I'm overflown when they're flying out of easterlies, but I'm 30 miles away from the airport, but I'm still saying I'm overflown, going over about 4,500 feet. That's my experience. That's how I would see it. If you can see a plane broadly close to your house, then I think you are overflown. There's no doubt about that. Mm. But I do think you're right in terms of there shouldn't be an argument over that definition.
Mm. Perfect. Do you agree with the averaging of aircraft noise?
That's a really good question. I think as a single metric, no. And I think what our metrics report said was, yes, that's okay to have that as a key metric way of measuring noise, but it's not the only factor. And I think the likelihood is in time it will be even challenged even more as a reliable factor. So there are, to me, there are three key factors. Average noise is a fair question. There is a fair measure on one aspect. The second aspect will be the extreme noise, so the extreme events, because actually that's what you remember. You don't remember the average. No one goes out and works out the average and see if it's noisy. You actually remember the noisy aircraft that goes across over your head. And I think the other factor is frequency. And I think if you put those three together, then you can get a better and more accurate a picture of the effects on people. And I think that is the crucial factor. I think the other thing, which is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, and I know the technocrats who put it as a key issue, but I've yet to meet a person anywhere in the country who experiences average noise. I've yet to meet anyone in the country who experiences modelled noise. Their noise experience is real and personal to them, and actually, you know, it's not from a model, it's from what is flying over them, or in terms of other forms of transport, what is going past their front door. So, and I think we have to move to a situation where much more of the noise data we are using in decision making is real data, not model data. And quite how we get to that position, I'm not convinced myself of yet, but I just know it's the where we need to be. And so that'll be a long-term goal of ICCAN to actually try and drive that forward, because it's just, it's two worlds in some places, and some airports it really is. Their model data and the experiences are completely different.
Well, I think that's a really human response, Rob, and I think everybody will welcome your comments on that, because I think it's something that people experience on a day-to-day basis, and trying to understand your own personal experience versus the model data is just often very, very far apart, isn't it? So I think people will be very pleased to hear your comments. So the next question is, noise contours used by the airport do not always include residents that are impacted by aircraft noise. Why is this?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it goes down to modelling, to be quite honest, because those all noise contours are made from the modelling done based on factory tested noise emissions from aircraft. Aircraft actually don't behave in the real world like they do in factory testings. We all know that. There are all sorts of factors that affect that noise, which is why I want to go to real-time noise experience rather than modelling. I think the contours, if they're up to date today, then they will be out of date tomorrow by their nature, because it's a changing situation. And actually, it will depend on how many different aircraft of what sort are actually in the skies at what time. I think there is an opportunity to try and use the noise plans as a way of sort of trying to make this more straightforward, because actually contours are one thing, but the bigger plan I think could actually concentrate on more on the actual noise experience rather than just what the models say. So I think that is a potential route forward on that one. I think again you've got to put the filter across that is there are different circumstances with different airports, and that can lead to confusion on that. But that, to my mind, would be the way forward.
It's a really interesting theme, Rob, about the realness of people's experiences versus the modelling. So it's a really interesting couple of points that you've made on that. The next question is, why are land use documents used at Gatwick to blight residents and devalue their homes when Gatwick do not even recognise them as being impacted by aircraft noise or inside noise contours?
I lost the first bit of that question, just crackled on me, I think.
So why are land use documents at Gatwick used to blight residents and devalue their homes when Gatwicks do not even recognise them as being impacted by aircraft noise or inside the noise contours?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I think that's as ever with all airports, there's certain practices that have developed which I'm not sure if they would stand up if they were all compared. So I can't tell you why Gatwick do that, I'm afraid, but that's something we can look into.
Perfect. So the next question that's been put forward, Rob, is, do you agree with Gatwick expansion plans that will impact residents significantly to the west, with departures early in the morning and evening and arrivals, as they currently have no respite from Gatwick operations, unlike other areas further out from the airport?
I think with Gatwick in particular, I think they will benefit hugely from the Airspace Modernization Programme. The potential is there to do that if they're allowed to use the airspace in a better way. I think is probably the best way to put it. If they expand, I'm not as convinced that the potential for that airspace modernization offers in terms of overall noise impact will necessarily be delivered. And I think the airport needs to try and prove that if they want to get support from others for that proposal. That would be what I would expect them to try and do. So I'm not convinced at the end of the day that their present plans will reduce noise and actually make it better for communities. But actually, it's not for me to be convinced. It's up to them to convince myself and others that that's the case. And I think the worrying thing for me is I don't think there's enough effort put into actually convincing communities, but convincing the regulators, other than the technocrats, about what their plans can deliver or can't deliver. And I think there needs to be an honesty about it. One thing, you might better move noise around, and you might better reduce it in some places, but you're not going to be able to reduce it in everywhere. I just think there needs to be honesty about that from everyone for a start, and that would make things easier about dealing with solutions. And one of the things we're really keen to do is try and get that consistency of information. I mean, we've been looking at Luton recently because they've been doing some plans, and their airspace modernisation plan, you can understand the logic of what they're doing, but then you get a really complex presentation which actually doesn't really give people that clarity of information as to how they're going to be affected. And that's what people want. And in fairness to Heathrow, I mean, they were trying to do that with some of their consultation events and 18 months ago. They were trying to sort of get that information, make that information available to people. But I think some of the other airports have struggled with that as a concept.
Thank you. So the final question for you, Rob, is how does ICAN reach those who could be impacted by policy? For example, saving CO2 by flying direct routes through the modernisation of airspace. And I think the question is really pointing to the fact that all noise forums in government and at Gatwick seem to be dominated by the same noise group.
I think at the end of the day, we can't reach everyone. We are a body of 14 people, and I have a team of 4 other commissioners. We're a small group. We have to target our resources. It would be in an ideal world, it would be great to have the duty to do lots of things. In reality, we're only ever going to have the power to try and intervene in extreme cases. What we will have, though, is the ability to try and raise overall standards if we can get some baseline consistency. And I think I know that's not what everyone wants to hear, but I have to be honest with you. In terms of the resources we've got, we have to try and move things forward. We have to try and create the arrangement, the right climate, so that people will treat noise seriously and will over time improve the way it's managed. We are not an organisation that's got the resource to go out there and enforce these things. But actually, if we can get a clarity of what should be enforced, then we can put pressure on the enforcers to make sure they do enforce. And as a result of that, I would hope that we can then drive overall impacts and standards in the right direction.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. That was the last question from me.
Okay, thank you.
Rob, again, thank you very much for your very straight and direct answers. They were very, very good. Now we're going to move on to the AGM. If Henry, you, Rob and Rupert want to remain with us, you're more than welcome to. But if you wish to leave, you may do so. But again, thank you very, very much indeed for all your time and effort.
I'd like to add my thanks from the committee to you all. And I'm sorry for the problems you had accessing. Not quite sure what went wrong, but anyway, I'm delighted that you all were able to join us this evening.
Thank you, Sally. And can I just say, before I leave, can I just say a big thank you to you, Sally, and you, Sir Nicholas, and all the members of your committee who we've worked with or engaged with over the last 12 months. You do help us. Your challenge and your experiences do help us, and I'd like to thank you for just taking the time to do that. I want you to know we do appreciate it.
Well, that's nice to hear. Thank you. Okay, so wonderful speakers this evening, and that set us off to a very good AGM. So moving on to the formal part of the AGM now. CAGNE has over the years helped many noise groups to be formed, and they've been linked to our name, but we've now found that this has caused confusion. And so during 2020, we established copyright and trade name for the CAGNE name, as well as the service we provide to communities relating to aviation. As you all know, CAGNE was formed in 2014 to help all communities, and we're as true today to the ethos we started with in 2014. We will not do deals, and we will not move noise from one area over the other. So CAGNE has participated during 2020 in lots of consultations in government with the Civil Aviation Authority, but we've also operated 2 surveys, one nationally and one locally, so that we can ascertain people's feelings. And these were open surveys, so not just to membership. Nearly 80% oppose Gatwick Airport rebuilding the emergency runway as a second runway, and over 73 wanted night flights to be banned. Surveys ensure that we reflect the residents' thoughts, and when we're taking part in consultations such as the ICCAN consultation, it enables us to use evidence from you to say this is what we have found by actually asking the questions of residents. This feedback, submitted as the umbrella group for Sussex, Surrey and Kent, enables us to actually project a picture of how communities are feeling about aviation, expansion and aircraft noise, as well as climate change. We have a new website, and that's thanks to the donations from residents. And I have to say a special thank you to Andrew and Jenny, who have worked very hard in getting that up and running. Any feedback you have on our new website, we would love to know, but hopefully it is now much, much better and much easier to use. We've participated in the Southeast Transport Forums, and actually we've made some progress in there in actually getting Gatwick included in their figures. We've worked with various NGOs, and we established the Gatwick Environment Group, which is a cooperative of environmental groups around the Gatwick area, so that we can talk and liaise with them. During COVID, we put forward that we didn't feel that aviation should receive bailouts. It's already subsidised by everybody, all those that don't fly, because they pay no VAT or duty.
Yeah,
we've produced factual documents for members, elected members, on unsustainable Gatwick expansion plans. We've also participated in the Crawley local plan, and we spoke at the Crawley planning meeting concerning the new rapid taxiway that will increase movements off the main runway. We've attended various meetings as CAGNE representing all communities. The government noise body ANNEG is still a closed shop and not representative of all communities' concerns. Unfortunately, GATCOM and NATMEG at Gatwick Airport are not being transparent, and the list goes on. The Gatwick Noise Management Board continues to be disappointing in that the top tier is now a closed shop. all communities are now not permitted to have access to decision makers, which was why the NMB was originally formed. It continues not to have a geographical balance of representation. As such, it continues to be biased to one set of airspace, unfortunately. The Gatwick land use documents are unfair, and that was mentioned as an ICCAN question. These go far outside the noise contours and they blight residents. And now, unfortunately, we see these documents in the government's night noise consultation. There is no government policy for these documents. And so we would urge you to take part in the night consultation, and we will be issuing to members this weekend an easy guide breaking down the 77 questions, the difficult questions that will put most people off from participating, and the 2 consultation dates. So we will be sending that out at the weekend, so please ensure you're on our mailing list. The CAGNE Town and Parish Council Forum is a separate body. We have 30 councils as members, and at the end of this month we have the co-authors of a paper called Green Jobs in the Gatwick Area. So that has received a lot of interest, and we've actually got a youth group attending just to hear that talk, which we think is very inspiring. And the Aviation Town and Parish Council Forum now has a seat on the Gatwick Noise Forum, which is good news as well. This May, the elections are now confirmed they will take place, and we need to really wake up councils to the fact that they are sleepwalking into a disaster if they support Gatwick expansion plans for a second runway. We are sympathetic for those that work in the industry, but we need to be looking at a greener future for economic stability. Elected members should look to the character in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, who offered unconditional amounts of sweets. There is a bad side to things when they are simply too good to be true. It may provide fillings now for cavities, but long term we need new teeth. We can't continue to see Gatwick Airport as a goose that lays the golden eggs if we are serious about pledge to tackle climate change. Aviation will continue to burn fossil fuel for many years after other industries have become green. Headlines of alternatives are not a reality now or anytime soon, so constraint has to be the answer until we can fly, knowing that we are not destroying the planet for future generations or creating unacceptable levels of noise impacting the well-being of communities. If we have learned one thing from the sadness of COVID, is that we have found pleasure, beauty in our natural world, the dark skies, the newfound tranquility for some. Let us cherish this chance to build back greener as well as better and not fall foul of the child catcher. As we all know, if something seems that good, it can only lead to expensive dentists for us all, with obesity for shareholders. So I'm going to close my report there by asking you to pledge £4 a year as a CAGNE supporter. We have overheads such as new websites, so we do need your regular income, and your pledge of £4 a year will enable us to keep working, because we all work as volunteers and we try to do everything free. And the other thing is, obviously, if we are going to challenge the Gatwick expansion plans, we will have to employ barristers and experts to give evidence at the planning hearing, which we believe will be at the start of 2022. So if you can make a donation to the legal fund, we would really appreciate that. So it now takes me to hand over to Andrew, who is our treasurer, and he will now tell us how the figures stack up. Andrew, over to you. And by the way, Andrew is not showing his face because he's on poor internet, and that is the only reason.
There are others, but I try to hide. Thanks very much, Sally. So I don't propose to wax lyrical about the figures and give you a pretty brief run through of them. So here we go. our income this year was primarily from personal donations from members and individuals. So thank you for that. Previously, we had some corporate donations, which I'll talk about later. So our income this year totaled £2,558. And this was a slight drop on the general donation level from previous years, which ran at about 3,000. But I suspect it's to be explained by COVID generally, and also the lack of face-to-face events and meetings, which we have run in the past, where they have actually helped generate quite a lot of income, as we've been able to hold people down upside down and shake out the fluff from their pockets as they've attended. One thing, there has been a welcome increase in the use of PayPal, which is very easy for us and hopefully very easy for people to donate via PayPal, and links all over our emails and our website now, if you feel that you need to. Our campaign, as Sally's just mentioned, and plea for small donations of £4 annually or more has been quite successful, and there is a growing groundswell of donations coming in on a monthly basis, and it's so much easier than finding the checkbook, dusting the fluff off, setting up a standing order, etc., etc. So, you know, it's easier for you guys and it's easier for us if we use PayPal to donate. So that's the kind of the income side. Really, the expenditure, our income was down, but so was our general expenditure. And again, this is due, unfortunately, to the pandemic. There were less meetings, less meeting costs, less publicity and handouts printed because we weren't able to hand out anything to anyone anywhere. So our expenditure this year was 2,149, and this compared to an expenditure last year of just under £4,000. So we have a small excess this year. So effectively, with the general operations for this year, we've added about £400 to our bank balance. So it stands at a little over £8,000 currently. If we want exact figures, £8,039. And that looks reasonable compared to our kind of annual run rate of £2,500 to £3,000. You might think, oh, that will keep us going for the next 3 years. But a proportion of that £8,000 has been specifically donated in the past and is ring-fenced for legal fees only. So effectively, if we take the legal fund out of our bank balance, we're left with about £2,750. So broadly, just under a year's expenditure. So it is important for people to help us with our general expenditure. You know, that general expenditure covers, as Sally says, website, hosting, printing costs, meeting room hire, and where possible, we beg, borrow and steal from various committee members, various friends to minimise the expenditure. But where, you know, we are miserable when we spend money, but we have to on occasions. So I would just like to reiterate Sally's plea for please keep donating, at least for our general operations budget. I think going forward, we've heard more august people mention this this evening than myself, but I would expect that Gatwick will recommence the second runway push this year. They will start pushing hard. The pandemic is possibly falling away, which is fantastic news for everyone. And hopefully we're going to be very much busier at the end of this year with, I don't know, meetings, public meetings, roadshows, handouts, publicity, etc., etc. So I'm expecting the general expenditure will rise past previous levels. And if it rises past previous levels, we do need more donations from our members. £4 less than a pint, and it's annual. So it's not a huge amount. In fact, a lot of people are very generous and donate much more than that, not only on an annual basis, but we have we have a reasonable amount of monthly donations that are considerably more than £4. So please stick your hand in your trousers, wallet, purse, down the back of the sofa, and give us some cash. Sally also said that we need to start fundraising for our legal fund. We have a small fund already, and we get a lot of pro bono professional legal advice from people. So thank you to those people. But at some stage, should we need to get legal with Gatwick, we will need more funding, and we will need a considerable amount of funding, because barristers and lawyers are not inexpensive, as we know. So I would just like to plea for more cash. It's my job to plea for cash, so I'm doing it. I have no shame. We need more money, so please give us some. We think we do a good job for our local areas and regions, and the committee put a lot of time and effort in free, and it just helps us do our job if we don't have the worry about wondering how we're going to pay the printers in 6 months' time. Yeah. So that's it, really. A very quick canter through. And I'm not expecting any questions, because accounts at the best of times are dull and boring. But basically, we made a little bit of cash this year, and we've got £8,000 in the bank. That's the bottom line in the takeaway.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Andrew. So I move that we adopt the financial statement of 2020, unless the committee has any questions. Do you want to raise your hand, committee, if you have any questions? Would someone like to second my motion, please, by raising a hand? Jane, thank you very much. Okay, so now we have our first poll. Attendees, could you please respond to the poll to accept the accounts? I believe you have 10 seconds to click yes or no, and you will get the result of the poll. We're still counting down. Okay, let me just share the results. Okay, we've got 96. So it's 96%. Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay. Right. So now we have the pleasure of electing our president. So, Sir Nicholas, I would like to nominate you as our president for this year. Could I have somebody second, please? Committee, if you could raise your hands, Anne and Jane and Caroline, thank you very much. And now we have our poll. Just a simple yes or no from the audience, please, to elect our president, Sir Nicholas White. I think we're there. Okay. Right. Yep. So now, Aidan, I have to hand over to you, because it's electing the chair of CAGNE for 2021. So if you just unmute yourself.
I have done so. Thank you, Sally. I nominate Sally Pavey to be the chair of CAGNE for the next year. Can somebody please second that or second that? Thank you. That's Lisa, Caroline.
Okay, and Jenny, if we can just have the poll. If you can just answer yes or no to elect the chairman, please. Thank you very much. I think I'm delighted to be re-elected. So we now come to electing the committee en bloc, and I'd just like to welcome Lisa Morris and Anne Davis, who are new committee members, and we elect the committee en bloc, and so you will now see a poll for this to elect the committee. Jenny, if you could just release the poll to elect the committee, please. If you can respond yes or no.
We need a seconder.
No, I don't need a seconder for the committee, thank you. Oh, I did, didn't I? It's going to be difficult to do that, isn't it? Okay.
Aidan.
Okay.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. Okay, are we there with the poll? Yeah. Okay, so now it gives me pleasure to hand over to Anne Davis to give the environmental report. And I just personally like to thank Anne for all her support and for all her efforts on the environmental front. Over to you, Anne.
Thanks, Sally. I've just got a slide which I'll share with everyone.
Thank you.
Oh, here we go. So it's a bit of an update on Pledge to Fly Less, which, sorry if I'm preaching to the converted, by the way, but this is about seeking to educate and not demonise. And a couple of people have kind of said this earlier, or perhaps not using this phrase, but about our individual carbon footprint. And there is something about how we choose to use our carbon footprint. So for some of us, we choose to fly less, in which case we can pledge. And educating is to be able to inform people about the impact that aviation has on carbon emissions. So as you can see, it's 2.5% in the UK and 5% worldwide. What you might find interesting is around frequent flyers. So in fact, nearly half the country don't fly at all, whereas 10% take more than 50% of the flights that go abroad from the UK. And the thing about aviation is carbon trading currently isn't really realistic or sustainable. And although a lot of people are working on aviation technology, it's not keeping pace with the climate crisis. And whilst it may get there at some point, it's certainly not there in the next few years. So there's something about wanting to look at our own individual carbon footprint. And for those of you who don't know, there's quite a few websites out there, including WWF, which you can go in and see how friendly yours is. And maybe we need to find other ways to holiday, or whether that be that we take the train or we don't go abroad. I mean, COVID's rather got in the way of all of this, by the way, as we all know. And maybe it's a silver lining to this very horrid cloud, that we kind of take stock of our own carbon footprint and what we choose to do with our time. And that's really the update. Hope there will be more next year, because we are working with other organisations around how we influence, including aviation, in other organisations' plans, because as you probably know, it's not even part of the government's, of the UK's emissions at the moment. So it's a bit ignored.
And I think one of the things you've achieved is that you've got the local SECA environment group, the Southeast Climate Group, to actually join with us and say that local authorities can't keep ignoring the emissions from Gatwick Airport in their climate change pledges, that they've got to start to include those within their council's climate emergency pledges. So that was a major achievement for you. And I know we've had a couple of meetings this week with Friends of the Earth, and listening to how the Heathrow Supreme Court hearing went through, and also how it's going forward with the Environment Bill. So both those are really interesting. Probably we were going to hand over, and Lisa was going to give us an update on the Constitution. But if you attended the AGM last year, we have put all the papers now of CAGNE's Constitution, membership, etc., on our website. So they are there if anybody wants to read them. And that was the decision we took, rather than, obviously we can't hand out papers today because we're virtual. So we took the decision just on our new website, and I hope that's okay with everybody. So now we have the CAGNE questions. So do we have any questions, Lisa?
We do have some questions. The first question, Sally, is: has EasyJet become the most significant airline at Gatwick? Will we be challenging them on the schedules which seem to allow such a large window for their flying?
Okay, yes, we can challenge them. And I think the night flight consultation that is taking place currently with government is one of the ways you can challenge EasyJet, because one of the problems with EasyJet is that they fly a lot of planes into Gatwick of a night time to turn them around for the early morning slots. Now, with the emergency runway being rebuilt as a second runway, if Gatwick are successful with their planning application, that will only increase the number of early morning flights that you will see EasyJet flying from 2 runways. So we will be challenging that, but we can challenge it in 2 ways. So ask for a ban on night flights, participate every single person in that consultation, and the first deadline is the 3rd of March. The second is the 31st of May, but I would strongly recommend you to follow our guidance that will go out this weekend and respond as we suggest. The 77 questions are unacceptable, and it will deter those people who are impacted by aircraft noise at night time. So take our suggestion, key points. The evidence is how you're impacted by aircraft noise at night. And take part of that, and that we can control EasyJet at night time, which means there won't be so many planes taking off first thing early in the morning, which are the shoulder periods, which cause real health issues. They're the most dangerous times of your sleep pattern. So during the day, we can't do a lot about challenging EasyJet slots, because they have the slots, they own the slots, and recently Gatwick tried to, because obviously EasyJet aren't flying all those slots currently, Gatwick tried to get those slots released so that Wizz could take them, and the government said no. I suppose the only saving grace with that is that EasyJet does have neo planes. They don't fly enough at Gatwick Airport. There's still the A320s and the A319s. We need more of the neos, which are quieter. But yes, of course, we will be challenging EasyJet, but EasyJet is 98% of Gatwick's business. That is not a good business model for anybody who operates a company. That is not a secure place to be. So does that answer the question, Lisa?
Yes, there's another part to the question, Sally. Also, will they be able to build up their Gatwick business to the detriment of their other regional services, which most holiday makers prefer? After all, who really wants to travel congested roads when it's only for the convenience of the airlines?
Okay, so already EasyJet's operation at Gatwick is far bigger than their head office, which is at Luton Airport. But you do have Luton Airport going for expansion. You do have Stansted going for expansion. None of those we endorse, because CAGNE's policy is no airport expansion. But it will be interesting to see what EasyJet does. There are going to be spare slots at Heathrow. And when Gatwick was going for a full-blown new runway, second runway, we call it the 3rd runway now, versus Heathrow, EasyJet wanted to move into Heathrow. They supported Heathrow expansion over Gatwick Airport's expansion. So it will be interesting to see what happens with the spare slots that will become available, unfortunately or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, because some airlines will fold. It's really grim. The new figures out from Eurocontrol shows how grim aviation is. But Gatwick has been the hardest hit airport in the UK. So I think that reflects on its market, which is leisure. Other airports obviously have a combination of business and leisure, but for Gatwick Airport, it is leisure. So yes, detriment to other airports, yes, but the airlines dictate, unfortunately. So yes, you will have this north-south divide. You will have cheaper landing fees at Gatwick to entice airlines to be at Gatwick Airport rather than Heathrow or Southampton or Luton or Stansted. They are privately owned airports. As such, they compete, and the government sees that as healthy, but it does mean that you end up with the airlines deciding where they want to be, and then the passengers have to make it there. And as we all know, that just then congests and pollutes our roads, because Gatwick only has one road and one railway line. So hopefully that answers that question.
So the final question, Sally, is Gatwick Airport's proposal for the emergency runway will impact unfairly on those under the existing flight path who are already enduring perpetually landing aircraft. What steps can be taken to ensure that this proposal is not given the nod by a government who is anxious to divert attention away from Heathrow?
Yeah, can't really answer that one, because I think that probably highlights the CAGNE sphere, is that whilst we're quiet, Gatwick's pushing ahead with a second runway. And although they've reduced the number of movements to 34,000 from 55,000, there'll be nothing to stop them to go for retrospective planning after that. And once you've got a second runway, it's very difficult to stop a company from using the capacity, as we've seen at Manchester. So in answer to that question, the only way we will stop this second runway, the rebuilding of the emergency runway, is through people power. And we do have the elections in May. And so it is down to every individual person to make the candidates pledge not to support Gatwick expansion. It is down to every individual to write to their member of parliament and to support CAGNE. As I say, our ethos is we will not do deals, and we do not move noise from one area over another, because we seek to be fair to all communities. And so support us. We are looking for people to research papers to assist us. They don't have to join the committee. We do have various people who are not committee members who do amazing work for us in researching business and aviation. So if you'd like to offer some help, we would be delighted to hear from you via our normal email address. But the only way that we can stop it from having the nod is people power. Lisa.
That was the last of the questions, Sally.
Okay. Is there any other business the committee member would like to raise at this time? I'm getting lots of shakings of heads. Right. So I think I can now officially close the CAGNE AGM 2021. I thank you all for attending, and please do join our mailing list. Make a pledge, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. And thank you very much. And we do have events lined up for 2021. Really, actually very interesting, exciting events, whether they're virtual or in person. Let's hope it's in person, and we've all had our injections, and we can all hug and go back to normal, apart from aircraft, obviously. But thank you ever so for attending, and thank you. I see Henry's still there. Thank you very much again, Henry. Thank you, Jenny, for operating us tonight. Great. And committee, thank you, and good night, everybody.
Right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.